On a windless, overcast afternoon, a wealthy man steps out of his truck at the gate of a mansion surrounded by tall iron bars and security cameras. Inside, his sickly son, with dark circles under his eyes and shallow breathing, drags a bucket of water across the cold stone floor, the horse in the stable restless. Hears every heavy step and stomps its hooves. The man hands his son a rag and silently points down the hall. The boy tries to clean, but his hands shake. He collapses, face hitting the marble, body limp. The agitated horse jumps the fence and gallops straight to the front door, breathing hard, eyes fixed. Love stories with animals? Then subscribe now so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for tuning in. Now, back to our story. The morning sun filtered through the towering oak trees that surrounded Westfield Manor, casting dappled shadows across the immaculate gardens. 12-year-old Ethan Montgomery dragged the heavy rake across the gravel driveway, his thin arms trembling with each stroke. Sweat beaded on his pale forehead despite the cool Virginia autumn air. His breath came in short, labored gasps as he paused to lean against the tool. "You've only cleared half the driveway, Ethan." William Montgomery's voice cut through the morning quiet, causing the boy to straighten immediately. "The entire east wing needs to be done before noon." "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, his voice barely audible as he gripped the rake tighter, ignoring the burning sensation in his muscles. William Montgomery stood tall on the mansion's grand porch, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour. The self-made business magnate had built his fortune in real estate development, transforming the sleepy Blue Ridge region with luxury resorts and exclusive properties. Everything about him commanded respect, from his perfectly groomed silver hair to his polished Italian leather shoes. Everything except the disappointment that flashed in his eyes whenever he looked at his only son. "Character is built through perseverance, son. Remember that." With those words, William turned and disappeared into the mansion, the heavy oak door closing behind him with a resounding thud. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, fighting back tears. Since his diagnosis with myasthenia gravis 3 years ago, he'd watched his father's expectations grow inversely to his physical strength. The rare autoimmune condition caused extreme muscle weakness and fatigue, but William refused to acknowledge the limitations it imposed on his son. "One day, you'll thank me for not coddling you," William would say whenever Ethan struggled to complete his assigned chores. The world doesn't give handouts to the weak. The sprawling 20-acre estate had become both Ethan's home and his prison. Every morning began with a list of tasks that would exhaust even a healthy child. Raking leaves, polishing floors, dusting the countless antiques that filled the mansion's 40 rooms. His father called it building character. His doctors called it dangerous overexertion. Ethan resumed his work, methodically pulling the rake across the gravel, focusing on the rhythmic scraping sound to distract from his aching limbs. The list of chores seemed endless. After the driveway came the brass fixtures in the main hall, then the library windows, and finally the marble floors in the foyer. All tasks his father insisted must be done by hand, not by the staff who maintained the rest of the property. "A Montgomery earns his place," his father would remind him, "just as I did." By midday, Ethan's hands were raw and blistered. He sat on the kitchen steps, hidden from the main house, and unwrapped the sandwich Mrs. Calloway, the housekeeper, had secretly prepared for him. The elderly woman with kind eyes was one of the few people who showed him genuine compassion, slipping him extra food and occasionally covering for him when tasks remained unfinished. "Your father's in his office on calls all afternoon," she whispered, pressing a cool glass of lemonade into his trembling hands. "Take an extra 15 minutes to eat, dear. You're looking peaky today." Ethan nodded gratefully, too exhausted to speak. As he ate, he gazed longingly toward the stables at the far end of the property. The one place where he found peace. The one place where he wasn't judged for his weakness. When he finished his lunch, Ethan checked his father's schedule pinned to the kitchen bulletin board, a habit born of self-preservation. Seeing that William had investor meetings until late afternoon, he made a decision. The library windows could wait. For just a little while, he needed to visit the stables. The walk across the grounds drained what little energy he had recovered during lunch. But the moment Ethan pushed open the heavy wooden stable door, a sense of calm washed over him. The familiar sense of hay, leather, and horses enveloped him like an old blanket. Unlike the cold perfection of the mansion, the stables felt alive, warm, and forgiving. "Hey, Shadow," Ethan called softly, approaching the last stall. The massive black Frisian lifted his head at the sound of the boy's voice, his intelligent eyes focusing immediately on Ethan. Unlike the expensive show horses his father kept for business associates to admire, Shadow had come to Westfield Manor as a rescue, underfed, mistreated, and considered worthless by his previous owner. William had purchased him on a whim during an auction, more as a tax write-off than out of compassion. The horse was too temperamental for riding guests and too unpredictable for shows, so he was largely left alone. Perhaps that shared sense of being an outsider had drawn Ethan and Shadow together. From the moment they met, an understanding had formed between them. The massive horse that snapped at trainers and refused to be saddled would stand perfectly still when Ethan approached, lowering his proud head to nuzzle the boy's shoulder. Ethan reached the stall and extended his hand. Shadow pressed his velvet muzzle against the boy's palm, blowing softly. Unlike his father's sharp, judgmental gaze, Shadow's dark eyes held no expectations, no disappointment. They simply accepted. "Sorry I couldn't come earlier," Ethan whispered, leaning against the stall door. His legs felt increasingly unsteady, a warning sign he recognized all too well. Dad's been pushing harder lately. The resort deal in Charlottesville has everyone on edge. Shadow nickered softly, as if understanding. The horse shifted closer, allowing Ethan to rest his weight against his solid form. This was their ritual, these stolen moments where Ethan could simply exist without the crushing weight of his father's expectations. "I don't think I can do it all today," Ethan confessed, his voice breaking. "The medicine isn't working as well as it used to. Dr. Marshall wants to adjust the dosage, but Dad says it's just in my head. He thinks I'm not trying hard enough." Shadow remained steadfast beside him, his warmth radiating through Ethan's thin cotton shirt. The boy buried his face in the horse's mane, inhaling the earthy scent. Here, in this quiet corner of the estate, miles from his father's disapproving gaze, Ethan could finally let the tears come. "Sometimes I wonder if he'd be happier with a different son," Ethan whispered. "Someone strong like him." The stable door creaked open, startling both boy and horse. Ethan quickly wiped his eyes on his sleeve as Marcus Jenkins, the stable master, entered carrying a hay bale. "Didn't expect to find you here this time of day, young Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said, his weathered face creasing with concern as he took in Ethan's exhausted posture. "Everything all right?" Marcus was one of the few staff members who'd been at Westfield before Ethan's mother left 6 years ago. Unlike the others who tiptoed around William Montgomery's temper, Marcus maintained a quiet dignity that even William respected. The man had a way with horses that bordered on magical, though it was merely decades of experience and infinite patience. "I'm fine," Ethan replied automatically, "just taking a short break before finishing my chores." Marcus set down the hay, bale, and approached, his experienced eyes taking in Ethan's trembling hands and the pallor of his skin. "You don't look fine to me, son. When's the last time you had your medicine?" "This morning," Ethan admitted. But I'm supposed to space out the doses, and I have so much to finish before Dad gets back from his meetings. Marcus frowned, the deep lines around his eyes deepening. Your health comes first, Mr. Ethan, whatever your father says. Not in this house, Ethan replied with a bitterness that sounded strange coming from someone so young. Marcus seemed about to say something more, but thought better of it. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an apple, offering it to Ethan. At least get some sugar in you, and take your medicine. I'll help you with the library windows after I finish up here. Dad would fire you if he found out. Let me worry about that. Marcus's voice was firm but kind. Now go on. Give Shadow his treat and then get yourself back to the house. You can come visit properly when you're feeling stronger. Ethan nodded, offering the apple to Shadow, who accepted it with surprising gentleness. As he turned to leave, the boy paused at the stable door. Marcus, do you think I'll ever be strong, like my father once? The stable master studied Ethan, and for a long moment before answering. There are different kinds of strength, Mr. Ethan, the kind that comes from muscle and the kind that comes from heart. From what I've seen, you've got more of the second kind than most grown men I know, including your father. The words followed Ethan as he made his slow way back across the manicured lawns toward the imposing mansion. Different kinds of strength. The concept was foreign in a household where strength was measured only in achievements, in perseverance, in never showing weakness. By the time he reached the main house, his legs were leaden and dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. Ethan paused at the kitchen entrance, steeling himself for the afternoon ahead. He could feel another episode coming on, the crushing fatigue that sometimes left him bedridden for days. But his father's investor dinner was tonight, and the entire house needed to be perfect. With trembling hands, Ethan reached into his pocket for his medication, only to find it empty. His pills were in his bedroom on the third floor of the east wing, seemingly miles away in his current state. Just a little longer, he whispered to himself. I can rest after the dinner. Just a little longer. In the distance, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. His father's Bentley was returning, early. Panic surged through Ethan as he looked at the unfinished list of chores, the library windows, the marble foyer, the polished silver for the dinner table. As the car door slammed shut, Ethan grabbed the nearest cleaning supplies and forced his failing body toward the library, unaware that in the stables behind him, Shadow had begun pacing restlessly in his stall, sensing something the humans around him could not. The storm was coming. The library windows remained half-cleaned when William Montgomery found his son. Ethan's arm moved in sluggish circles across the glass, each motion weaker than the last, the cloth dropping from his fingers as his father's footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. I expected these to be finished an hour ago. William's voice carried the sharp edge of disappointment that Ethan had grown accustomed to. The Prescotts and the Harringtons will be here at 7. Everything needs to be perfect. I'm sorry, sir, Ethan managed, bending to retrieve the fallen cloth. The simple movement sent the room spinning around him. I'll finish right away. William surveyed his son with narrowed eyes, taking in the boy's pallid complexion and trembling hands. For a moment, something resembling concern flickered across his face, quickly replaced by the stern mask he habitually wore. Have you taken your medication today? He asked, his tone softening marginally. This morning, Ethan replied, not mentioning that he'd missed his afternoon dose. His father hated what he called excuses. William checked his Rolex and frowned. You have 1 hour to complete the library and set up the dining room. Mrs. Calloway has prepared the silver service. I expect it polished and arranged properly. He paused, then added, if you finish everything satisfactorily, you may join us for the first course of dinner. The offer hung in the air, a rare invitation to his father's world. Ethan straightened, despite the fatigue weighing down his limbs. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure everything is perfect." As his father turned to leave, Ethan gathered his remaining strength and attacked the windows with renewed determination. The possibility of sitting at his father's table, of being seen as worthy enough to join the prominent families of Albemarle County, drove him forward despite the warning signals his body was sending. Outside the tall library windows, the afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the immaculate grounds. In the distance, Ethan could see the stables, and for a moment he imagined he could hear Shadow's distinct whinny, a sound that always seemed to find him when he needed it most. With aching arms, Ethan finished the windows and moved to the dining room, where the gleaming mahogany table stretched seemingly endlessly before him. The silver service Mrs. Calloway had left was exquisite, pieces that had belonged to Ethan's great-grandmother, only used for the most important occasions. Each fork, knife, and spoon needed to be polished to a mirror shine. As he worked, Ethan's mind drifted to his mother. He could barely remember her face now, just a soft voice and gentle hands. She had left when he was 6, unable to bear William's relentless drive and impossible standards. Her departure had only hardened his father, as though her absence confirmed his belief that weakness was intolerable. "Your mother chose the easy path," William had told him once, after Ethan had asked why she never visited. "A Montgomery chooses the path of perseverance, no matter how difficult." The silver blurred before Ethan's eyes as he mechanically polished each piece. His mother had taken the easy path, yet his father's path of perseverance had left them both isolated in this beautiful, cold mansion, surrounded by wealth but devoid of warmth. By the time Ethan placed the last polished spoon in its precise position, black spots danced at the edges of his vision. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 6:30. He had done. It completed every task. Now he just needed to change into proper dinner attire to join his father's esteemed guests. The grand staircase loomed before him like a mountain. Ethan gripped the ornate banister, his legs threatening to buckle with each step. Third floor, east wing, his bedroom seemed impossibly far away. Halfway up, he had to stop, leaning heavily against the wall as his breath came in short, painful gasps. "You can do this," he whispered to himself, "just a little further." In his room, Ethan fumbled with the buttons of his dress shirt, his fingers refusing to cooperate. He glanced at the small orange pill bottle on his nightstand, the medication that helped control his symptoms. With shaking hands, he swallowed a pill dry, knowing it would take at least an hour to have any effect. Too late for tonight, but perhaps it would help him survive the dinner. The mirror reflected a boy trying desperately to look like the son William Montgomery wanted. Straight posture despite screaming muscles, hair neatly combed, blue blazer hiding his too thin frame. Ethan practiced a smile that didn't reveal his exhaustion and headed back downstairs just as the first guests were arriving. The Prescotts arrived first. Bradley Prescott was his father's most important investor, followed by the Harringtons and their daughter Emma, a girl from Ethan's class at Greenwood Preparatory who had never once spoken to him. Judge Patterson and his wife came next, then Dr. and Mrs. Marshall. Ethan's heart sank when he saw his neurologist among the guests. Dr. Marshall had been advocating for months that William reduce Ethan's chores and allow him more rest. His presence tonight would only highlight the distance between the doctor's recommendations and Ethan's reality. "Ah, there he is," William announced as Ethan entered the foyer. "My son Ethan. He'll be joining us for the first course tonight." Ethan managed a polite smile and handshake for each guest, feeling Dr. Marshall's concerned gaze lingering on him longer than the others. The dining room, now illuminated by the crystal chandelier and candles, seemed to shimmer and waver before Ethan's eyes as he took his assigned seat. The conversation flowed around him, talks of property values, the new wing of the hospital that would bear the Montgomery name, the upcoming charity gala. Ethan focused on sitting upright, on holding his soup spoon without trembling, on being the perfect Montgomery heir his father expected. "Ethan," Dr. Marshall said during a lull, "in conversation, how are you feeling with the new medication regimen we discussed at your last appointment?" All eyes turned to him. His father's gaze hardened imperceptibly. "Fine, thank you," Ethan replied automatically. "It's helping quite a bit." It was the answer his father expected, the Montgomery answer. Never complain, never show weakness. But Dr. Marshall wasn't fooled. "I'm glad to hear that," the doctor said carefully, "though I'd still recommend we consider reducing your daily activities. Rest is essential with your condition." William's knife clinked against his plate a little too sharply. "My son has always thrived on structure and responsibility, Dr. Marshall. Idle hands lead to idle minds." His tone was pleasant, but carried a warning. "Of course," Dr. Marshall conceded, though his eyes remained on Ethan. "Just something to consider." The room was growing increasingly hot. Ethan loosened his collar slightly, trying to take deeper breaths. The voices around him seemed to come from underwater, distant and garbled. He reached for his water glass, but his hand refused to cooperate, knocking against it instead. Water spilled across the immaculate white tablecloth. "I'm sorry," he gasped, dabbing frantically at the spreading stain with his napkin. "I didn't mean to." "Perhaps you should excuse yourself, Ethan," his father suggested, his voice tight, with disapproval. "You seem tired." It wasn't a suggestion, but a command. Ethan nodded, pushing back his chair with effort. "Please excuse me," he managed to say to the guests. "Thank you for coming to our home." The walk from the dining room to the hallway felt eternal. Ethan could feel concerned gazes following him, particularly Dr. Marshall's. The moment he was out of sight, he sagged against the wall, his legs threatening to give out entirely. The staircase to his bedroom might as well have been Mount Everest in his current state. Instead, Ethan made his way through the kitchen and out the back door. The cool evening air hit his face like a bomb. He needed to get to the stables, to Shadow. In his confused state, the massive horse represented safety and understanding that he couldn't find anywhere else. The path to the stables blurred before him as Ethan stumbled forward. The manicured lawn felt uneven beneath his feet, the ground seeming to tilt and shift. Behind him, the lights of the mansion glowed, the dinner party continuing without interruption. His absence would barely be noticed. Halfway across the lawn, Ethan's legs finally betrayed him. He fell to his knees, then forward onto his hands, the world spinning violently around him. He tried to call out, but his voice emerged as barely a whisper. The cool grass pressed against his cheek as his arms gave way. In the distance, he heard it, a frantic whinny, followed by the sound of hooves pounding against wood. Shadow was calling to him, sensing his distress from hundreds of yards away. The thought brought a strange comfort as darkness closed in around Ethan's vision. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he wasn't sure to whom. His father for being weak, Shadow for not reaching him, or himself for trying so hard to be someone he could never be. The last thing Ethan heard before consciousness slipped away was the distant sound of splintering wood and Marcus's alarmed shout as Shadow broke free from his stall. William Montgomery prided himself on his self-control. In boardrooms and business negotiations, he was known for his unflappable demeanor. But as a boy growing up in the poorest corner of Appalachia, he had been anything but controlled. His earliest memories were of hunger and shame, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach as he watched classmates eat lunches he could never afford. The holes in his shoes patched with cardboard, the snickers of better-dressed children. His father, a coal miner with a third-grade education, had worked himself to death by 50, leaving behind nothing but calloused hands and broken dreams. Never let them see you're hurting, his father had told him. Pain is for private, success is for public. William had taken those words to heart, transforming his shame into determination. Every humiliation became fuel, every obstacle a challenge to overcome. By 16, he was working 3 jobs while maintaining perfect grades. By 20, he had a scholarship to UVA. By 30, his first million. By 40, his first 100 million. The cost had been high, a marriage that couldn't survive his drive, relationships sacrificed on the altar of success, a hardness that had settled into his bones until it became indistinguishable from his character. But William considered it worth the price. He had escaped the poverty that had claimed his father. He had built something lasting. When Ethan was born, William had seen his legacy secured, a son who would never know hunger or shame, who would inherit not just wealth, but the strength it took to create it. Ethan's diagnosis at 9 had struck William like a physical blow. The doctors spoke of limitations, of special accommodations, of a life defined by what couldn't be done rather than what could. William refused to accept it. He had overcome every obstacle in his path through sheer will and hard work. Surely his son could do the same. Weakness was a choice, not a sentence. These thoughts circled in William's mind as he expertly guided the dinner conversation, his social mask firmly in place despite the embarrassment of Ethan's exit. He was midway through describing the new development project when a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, the sound of running feet, and beneath it all, the distinctive sound of a horse in distress. "Excuse me," William said smoothly, placing his napkin beside his plate. "It seems something requires my attention." He stepped onto the back terrace just as Marcus Jenkins appeared, his weathered face grave in the soft landscape lighting. "Mr. Montgomery," the stablemaster said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's Ethan. He's collapsed on the south lawn. The ambulance is on its way." The carefully constructed walls of William's composure cracked. "What happened?" he demanded, already striding across the terrace toward the lawn. "Shadow broke out of his stall," Marcus explained, keeping pace. "Found the boy passed out halfway to the stables. If that horse hadn't raised such a ruckus, I might not have found him in time." As they crested the small rise in the lawn, William saw them, his son's small form lying motionless on the grass, and beside him, the massive black Frisian standing guard, refusing to leave despite Mrs. Calloway's attempts to lead him away. For the first time in decades, William Montgomery felt something he had sworn never to feel again: helplessness. The same helplessness he had felt watching his father cough blood into a handkerchief, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop the inevitable. As he ran toward his son, William's carefully constructed worldview began to crumble around him. The sound of approaching sirens pierced the night, and behind him, he was vaguely aware of dinner guests spilling onto the terrace, Dr. Marshall already rushing ahead with his medical bag. But all William could see was Ethan's pale face and the massive horse-standing sentinel beside him, as if challenging anyone, even Ethan's father, to cause the boy further harm. The sterile fluorescence of Albemarle Regional Hospital cast harsh shadows across William Montgomery's face as he sat rigidly in the waiting room. The plastic chair, so different from the handcrafted furniture that filled his mansion, dug uncomfortably into his back, a physical reminder that here, his wealth meant nothing. Here he was just another worried parent. Dr. Marshall had been with Ethan for over an hour, along with a team of specialists summoned by the mere mention of the Montgomery name. Yet William found no comfort in this privilege. For perhaps the First time in his adult life, he would have traded every dollar, every connection, every achievement for a simple certainty that his son would be all right. "Mr. Montgomery?" William looked up to find Dr. Marshall standing before him, white coat wrinkled, expression grave. "How is he?" William asked, rising to his feet. "Stable," Dr. Marshall replied, motioning for William to follow him to a quieter corner. "But I won't sugarcoat this for you. Ethan experienced a myasthenic crisis, a severe weakening of the respiratory muscles. If he hadn't been found when he was..." The doctor let the sentence hang unfinished. "Will he recover?" William's voice sounded strange to his own ears, vulnerable, uncertain. "Yes, with proper treatment and rest." "A lot of rest." Dr. Marshall's tone hardened slightly. "This is exactly what I've been warning you about for months, William. Myasthenia gravis isn't a condition that can be overcome through willpower or character building. It's a medical reality that requires accommodation." William stared at the doctor, the words hitting him like physical blows. For a successful man who had built his life on the principle that any obstacle could be conquered through sheer determination, the concept of an unchangeable limitation was foreign, almost incomprehensible. "I want what's best for my son," he said stiffly. "Then listen to what I'm telling you," Dr. Marshall replied, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine concern. "Ethan needs a completely different routine. Limited physical exertion, regular rest periods, consistent medication, and most importantly, he needs to know that his worth isn't measured by his physical capabilities." The last statement landed like an accusation. William opened his mouth to object, then closed it again as an image flashed in his mind. Ethan lying motionless on the lawn, the massive black horse standing guard over him, challenging anyone, even his own father, to cause the boy further harm. "Can I see him?" William asked instead. Dr. Marshall nodded. "He's awake, though tired. Room 412. As William turned to go, the doctor added, "He's been asking about the horse." Ethan lay still in the hospital bed, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. His thin frame seemed to disappear beneath the blankets, making him look younger than his 12 years. An IV line snaked from his arm, delivering medication to help control his symptoms. When William entered, Ethan's eyes fluttered open. The same deep blue as his mother's, a fact that often caused William a pang of complicated emotions. "Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice raspy from the breathing tube they had removed an hour earlier. William moved to the bedside, awkwardly placing his hand near his son's without quite touching him. Physical affection had never come easily to him, not since his own childhood, where it had been notably absent. "How are you feeling?" he asked, the question sounding inadequate even to his own ears. "Tired," Ethan admitted. Then, with characteristic concern for others rather than himself, "I'm sorry about the dinner party." The words struck William like a physical blow. His son was apologizing for collapsing due to exhaustion, for a medical emergency that nearly took his life, because he was worried about a business dinner. "The dinner doesn't matter," William said firmly. "Nothing matters except you getting better." Ethan's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected response. He studied his father's face, as if searching for the stern, demanding man he knew so well. "Is Shadow okay?" he asked after a moment. "Marcus said he broke out of his stall." William nodded, remembering the frantic call from Mrs. Calloway as he'd followed the ambulance to the hospital. "He's fine. Apparently he kicked down the stall door when you collapsed. Marcus couldn't get him to leave your side until the paramedics arrived." A small smile touched Ethan's pale lips. "He knew I was in trouble." "Yes," William agreed quietly. "It seems he did." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, filled with all the things neither knew how to say. William stared at the monitors, tracking his son's vital signs. the tangible evidence of how close he had come to losing the one thing in his life that truly mattered. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was hesitant. "Am I in trouble for not finishing everything before the dinner?" The question broke something inside William. He thought of his own father, of the brutal lessons about strength and perseverance, of the belief system he had built his life around and then imposed on his son. For the first time, he saw it clearly, not as wisdom, but as damage being passed from one generation to the next. "No," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You're not in trouble. You never should have been doing those chores in the first place." He paused, struggling with words that did not come easily to him. "I was wrong, Ethan, and I'm sorry." Ethan's eyes widened at the unprecedented apology. In 12 years, he had never heard his father admit to being wrong about anything. "Dr. Marshall says you'll need to stay here for a few days," William continued. "And when you come home, things will be different. I promise you that." Before Ethan could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. A young woman in scrubs appeared at the door, her expression hesitant. "Excuse me, Mr. Montgomery. There's someone here asking about Ethan, a Ms. Cooper. She says she's a teacher at Greenwood Prep." William frowned, not recognizing the name. "Ethan's homeroom teacher is Mrs. Blackwell." "I'm not his homeroom teacher," a voice called from the hallway, and a moment later a woman in her early 30s with curly auburn hair and bright green eyes stepped into view. "I run the therapeutic riding program at Stillwater Farm. We partner with Greenwood for their physical education alternatives." She stepped forward, extending her hand to William. "Olivia Cooper, I've been trying to reach you for months about enrolling Ethan in our program." William vaguely recalled a stack of brochures and permission forms that he had dismissed without reading. Alternative physical education had seemed like coddling, another way of telling Ethan he wasn't capable of what other children could do. "This isn't a good time," William began, but Ethan's voice interrupted him. "The horse program?" he asked, a spark of interest animating his tired features. "The one Emma Harrington talks about?" Olivia smiled warmly at Ethan. "That's right. Emma's one of our volunteers. When she heard you were here, she called me right away." William blinked, in surprise. Emma Harrington, the daughter of one of his most important business associates, who had sat silently at dinner just hours ago while Ethan struggled to maintain his composure. "I heard what happened," Olivia continued, her eyes moving between father and son, "and about your horse, Shadow, raising the alarm. That kind of bond between a person and a horse is exactly what our program is built around." "Can you tell me more about it?" Ethan asked, more animated than William had seen him in months. As Olivia explained the program, how children with various physical challenges worked with specially trained horses, how the animals provided both physical therapy and emotional support. William watched his son's face. For the first time in years, he saw genuine excitement there, a spark of the curious, enthusiastic child Ethan had been before illness, and his father's expectations had dimmed that light. "We'd love to have you join us when you're feeling better," Olivia concluded. "And from what I hear about Shadow, he might have a talent for this kind of work too. Not all horses have the temperament for it, but the ones who form protective bonds with people often excel." "Could he really?" Ethan asked, looking to his father with a mixture of hope and hesitation, clearly expecting refusal. The look pierced William's heart. When had his son become afraid to ask him for things? When had he become the kind of father whose approval was feared rather than sought? "If Dr. Marshall thinks it would be beneficial," William heard himself saying, "then I think it's worth considering." The surprise and cautious joy on Ethan's face made something shift inside William's chest, a wall beginning to crumble, a perspective beginning to change. After Olivia left, promising to return with more information, Ethan's eyelids began to droop, the brief excitement giving way to exhaustion. "Get some rest," William said, awkwardly patting his son's hand. "I'll be here when you wake up." As Ethan drifted into sleep, William remained in the uncomfortable chair beside the bed, watching the rise and fall of his son's chest. In the quiet of the hospital room, with the weight of responsibility and regret heavy on his shoulders, William Montgomery began the painful process of dismantling the beliefs that had guided his life and nearly cost him his son. 3 days later, Ethan returned to Westfield Manor to find his world transformed. His bedroom had been moved from the 3rd floor to a newly renovated suite on the ground floor, eliminating the need to climb stairs. A private nurse had been hired to monitor his condition and administer his medications. Most shockingly, William had cleared his calendar for the next 2 weeks, putting his numerous business ventures on hold to focus solely on his son's recovery. "Your only job right now is to rest and get stronger," William told him as he helped Ethan settle into his new room. The awkwardness between them remained, but beneath it lay something new, a tentative bridge being built across the chasm of misunderstanding. On Ethan's nightstand sat a framed photograph he had never seen before, a younger, softer version of his father holding a newborn baby, looking at the tiny bundle with an expression of wonder and vulnerability that Ethan couldn't reconcile with the stern, demanding man he knew. "When was this taken?" he asked, picking up the frame. William glanced at the photograph, a fleeting smile softening his features. "The day you were born, your mother took it." He hesitated, then added, "I was terrified, you know, holding something so perfect, so fragile, wondering how I could possibly be worthy of you." The confession hung in the air between them, opening a door to conversations they had never had. Over the following days, as Ethan gradually regained his strength, William began sharing stories of his own childhood in poverty, of the hunger and shame that had driven him, of his fear that without constant vigilance, his hard-won success could slip away. "I thought I was protecting you," he admitted one evening, as they sat on the back terrace, watching the sunset paint the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Teaching you to be strong enough to face anything. I didn't understand that there are different kinds of strength." Ethan, wrapped in a soft blanket despite the mild spring evening, considered his father's words, like what Marcus said, about strength of heart. William nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to see that now." Each day, Ethan's routine centered around rest, proper nutrition, and carefully monitored medication. Dr. Marshall visited regularly, expressing cautious approval at the changes. But the highlight of Ethan's day was always the same, the hour each afternoon when Marcus would bring Shadow from the stables to visit. The first time, William had watched in amazement as the formerly unpredictable horse approached Ethan with extraordinary gentleness, lowering his massive head to the boy's level, standing perfectly still as Ethan stroked his velvet muzzle. There was an understanding between them that transcended words, a silent communication that spoke of mutual trust and protection. "He's always been like this with Ethan," Marcus explained quietly to William as they observed the pair. "From the first day, like he knew the boy needed him." A week after Ethan's return home, Olivia Cooper arrived at Westfield Manor with Emma Harrington beside her. To William's surprise, the normally reserved teenage girl immediately went to Ethan, her usual social awkwardness forgotten as she animatedly described the therapeutic riding program. "It's the best thing ever," she enthused. "The horses can sense how you're feeling even when you don't say anything, and no one judges you there. Everyone's just trying to get better in their own way." As Olivia outlined the program's schedule and requirements, William found himself intrigued by the passion with which she spoke, not just about horses, but about creating a community where children with various challenges could find acceptance and purpose. Shadow would be perfect for our program, Olivia said, after meeting the massive Frisian. He's already demonstrated protective instincts and a special bond with Ethan. With proper training, he could become an exceptional therapy horse. You mean he could help other kids too? Ethan asked, his hand resting on Shadow's neck. Absolutely, Olivia confirmed. Horses like Shadow have an innate ability to connect with people who are struggling. It's almost as if they can sense emotional pain and respond to it with compassion. William, watching his son's face light up at the idea, felt something shift inside him. For years, he had measured worth in terms of productivity, success, and strength. Now, standing in the garden of his opulent estate, he began to glimpse a different kind of value, one found in connection, in compassion, in using one's gifts to ease another's burden. We have 20 acres here, he said suddenly. Most of it unused except for appearances. Would your program be interested in expanding to a second location? Olivia blinked in surprise. Are you offering to host therapeutic riding sessions at Westfield? I'm considering it, William replied, carefully. It would give Ethan access to the program without having to travel when he's feeling weak, and it seems a shame to have all this space and not put it to better use. The conversation that followed planted seeds that would grow in unexpected ways in the months to come. As William discussed potential logistics with Olivia, Ethan and Emma walked Shadow around the garden, talking animatedly about the other children in the program. Later that evening, after their visitors had departed, Ethan sat with his father in the library, once a place of work and pressure, now slowly transforming into a space for connection. Did you really mean it? Ethan asked. About letting other kids come here for the horse program? William nodded, surprising himself with how right the decision felt. I think it's a good use of our resources. He hesitated, then added more honestly, and I think it might be good for both of us to have more people around. This house has been too empty for too long. Ethan studied his father's face, searching for the stern businessman who had driven him to collapse just weeks ago. Instead, he found a man he barely recognized, still reserved, still awkward with emotion, but somehow softer around the edges, more willing to listen than to dictate. I'd like that, Ethan said simply. Outside the library windows, Shadow grazed peacefully in the paddock that had been hastily constructed near the house. The massive black horse lifted his head occasionally to check on the lighted windows, as if keeping watch over the boy he had appointed himself to protect. Inside, father and son began the slow, sometimes painful process of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of understanding rather than expectation. They were both learning new definitions of strength, not as an absence of weakness, but as the courage to be vulnerable, to change, to reach out despite the risk of rejection. And in the stables and gardens of Westfield Manor, something new was taking root, a community beginning to form around a boy, a father, and a horse who had somehow known what they all needed before they understood it themselves. The sign at the entrance to Westfield Manor had changed. Beneath the elegant iron archway that still bore the Montgomery family crest, a new wooden placard read, Westfield Haven, Therapeutic Riding and Healing Center. On summer Saturdays like this one, the once empty driveway filled with vehicles, modest family cars and vans dropping off children for their weekly sessions, alongside the occasional luxury vehicle belonging to donors and supporters of the program. Ethan, Montgomery, now 14, stood at the edge of the newly constructed riding arena, clipboard in hand, his blue eyes alert as he watched 8-year-old Lily Ramirez take her first solo ride on a gentle palomino named Buttercup. Lily's cerebral palsy made her movements jerky and unpredictable, but the horse moved with steady patience beneath her, responding to the smallest correct cue with immediate cooperation. "That's it, Lily. Keep your eyes up where you want to go," Ethan called encouragingly. "Buttercup knows what to do if you just show her the way." Lily's face, usually tight with concentration as she navigated a world not designed for her body's challenges, relaxed into a wide smile as the horse responded to her subtle weight shift by turning smoothly around the barrel at the end of the arena. "I did it!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying the slight slur that often made other children at school mock her. Here, surrounded by volunteers who recognized her determination and horses who cared nothing about perfect speech, Lily bloomed. Like her namesake, Flower, Ethan made a note on his clipboard, recording Lily's progress. In the 2 years since his collapse and his father's subsequent transformation, Ethan had grown not just physically stronger through proper medical care and appropriate activity, but more confident as well. His myasthenia gravis remained a daily reality with good days and bad, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become just one part of a life increasingly filled with purpose and connection. From the observation deck built alongside the arena, William Montgomery watched his son with quiet pride. At 53, William's hair had more silver than before, and new lines had settled around his eyes, not from stress, as they once would have been, but from something rarer in his life, laughter and emotional expression. He still ran his business. Empire still commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, but the ruthless drive that had once consumed him had been tempered by a new understanding of what truly mattered. "He's becoming quite the instructor," observed Marcus Jenkins, who had been promoted from stable master to program director of Westfield Haven. The older man's weathered face creased with approval as he watched Ethan guide Lily through the final steps of her lesson. "Has a real gift for knowing exactly when to challenge them and when to let them find their own way." William nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. He was still learning to express. "He gets that from his mother," he said softly. "She always knew how to make people feel capable without pushing them over the edge." He paused, then added, "Unlike his father." Marcus chuckled. "Don't sell yourself short, Mr. Montgomery. You're not the same man you were 2 years ago. None of us are." That was certainly true. What had begun as a simple accommodation for Ethan's participation in therapeutic riding had evolved into something far greater than William could have imagined. When Olivia Cooper had mentioned the long waiting list of children hoping to join her program at Stillwater Farm, William had offered not just space, but resources, building a state-of-the-art arena, climate-controlled stables, and accessible facilities designed with input from medical professionals and parents of children with various needs. The Montgomery Foundation, once focused primarily on putting the family name on hospital wings and university buildings, now directed significant funding toward programs serving children with physical challenges and chronic illnesses. William still insisted on excellence, still demanded results, but his definition of those terms had fundamentally shifted. "Dad," Ethan called, waving from the arena gate after helping Lily dismount. "Jason's mom is here to talk about the summer camp planning committee. Can you meet with her while I finish up with the Thompson twins?" William nodded, making his way down from the observation deck. As he walked through the facility that had once been merely his showplace home, he nodded to volunteers, greeted parents by name, and stopped to praise a child who had just completed a difficult mounting exercise. These small human interactions, once deemed a waste of valuable time in his relentlessly efficient life, had become the moments he treasured most. In the converted sunroom that now served as a meeting space, William found Meredith Anderson waiting. A single mother whose son Jason's muscular dystrophy had progressively robbed him of mobility. Meredith had become one of the program's most dedicated volunteers despite working 2 jobs to make ends meet. "Jason's having a good day today," she said after they had exchanged greetings. "He said to tell you Shadow was extra awesome during their session." William smiled at the mention of the massive black Frisian who had become the heart and soul of Westfield Haven. Shadow, once considered too unpredictable for guests, had proven to have an extraordinary gift for working with the most vulnerable children, those with severe physical limitations or emotional trauma. The horse, who had once saved Ethan's life, now regularly performed minor miracles, connecting with children who had retreated from human contact, providing physical support to weakened bodies, and somehow sensing exactly what each child needed. Before they asked, "Shadow has better instincts than most humans I know," William acknowledged, "including me." "Don't underestimate yourself," Meredith replied with a gentle directness that was her hallmark. "Not many men in your position would have transformed their entire lives because of one moment of revelation." William thought back to that night 2 years ago, Ethan lying pale and still on the manicured lawn, the horse standing guard, his own world shattering and rebuilding itself in a hospital waiting room. "It wasn't just one moment," he said quietly. "It was a lifetime of moments I'd missed, suddenly becoming visible all at once." Their meeting about the summer camp, a week-long residential program for children who couldn't otherwise afford therapeutic riding, was productive and efficient. William still approached planning with the same attention to detail that had made him a business success, but now those skills served a different purpose. As they finished, Meredith hesitated before gathering her notes. "There's something else," she said. "The Mothers Support Group has been talking. We'd like to expand the program to include an evening session just for caregivers." William raised an eyebrow. "What kind of session?" "A chance for parents to ride too," Meredith explained. "Many of us spend so much time caring for our children that we never do anything just for ourselves. The physical and emotional release of riding, even just for an hour a week." She trailed off, then added more softly, "It could make a difference for a lot of us who are hanging by a thread." William considered the request, mentally reviewing the facility's schedule and resources. In his old life, he would have immediately calculated the cost-benefit ratio, the return on investment. Now, he simply asked, "Would it help?" Meredith's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "More than you know." "Then we'll make it happen," he said simply. "Talk to Marcus about the scheduling, and we'll start next month." After Meredith left, William stepped outside into the summer sunshine. The grounds of Westfield Manor had changed dramatically in 2 years. The formerly ornamental gardens now included accessible pathways and sensory stations designed with input from occupational therapists. The east wing of the mansion had been converted into classrooms and therapy spaces, while the family living quarters had been consolidated to the west wing. At the far end of the main paddock, William spotted Shadow standing perfectly still as a volunteer secured Jason Anderson in a specially designed saddle. The boy's atrophied legs could no longer grip the horse's sides, but the adaptive equipment allowed him to sit securely while Shadow moved beneath him. The massive horse, sensing his rider's vulnerability, walked with exquisite care, his powerful body becoming a gentle platform for the child whose own body had betrayed him. William watched as his son approached, speaking softly to both horse and rider. Ethan's own movements were careful today, a sign that his condition was flaring slightly, but his face showed none of the shame or frustration that had once accompanied his weaker days. Instead, he moved with acceptance of his limitations and confidence in his abilities, a balance William was still learning himself. A familiar voice beside him interrupted his thoughts. "He's come so far." Olivia Cooper joined him at the fence, her curly auburn hair now streaked with premature silver, from the stress of running two facilities. Both of them have. William nodded, knowing she meant both Ethan and Shadow, whose parallel journeys from isolation to purpose had formed the backbone of Westfield Haven. "I received the application from the Tucker family this morning," Olivia continued, referring to a family whose daughter had recently been paralyzed in a car accident. "They have no insurance coverage for alternative therapies, and the father lost his job while caring for her during the initial hospitalization." "Approve it," William said without hesitation. "Full scholarship." Olivia smiled. "I already did. I knew what you'd say." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else. The university called. They want to expand their research partnership with us, study the physiological and emotional benefits of equine therapy more systematically. It would mean more staff, more data collection, but also more credibility with medical insurers." "What do you think?" William asked, valuing her opinion in a way the old William Montgomery never would have appreciated. "I think it's time," she replied. "What we're doing here is changing lives. If we can prove it scientifically, maybe more children will get access to these programs through insurance coverage." William nodded thoughtfully. "Draft a proposal. We'll review it next week." His attention returned to the paddock, where Jason was now grinning widely as Shadow carried him around a simple obstacle course, the boy's weak upper body supported by his specially designed saddle, but his hands independently holding the reins. "Mr. Montgomery," Jason called out when he spotted William at the fence. "Look, I'm riding all by myself today." "I see that," William called back, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "You and Shadow make an excellent team." The joy on the boy's face struck William anew. How strange life was, that this child with his failing body could experience such pure happiness, while the younger William Montgomery, with his healthy body and growing fortune, had never known true joy until he'd nearly lost what mattered most. As the afternoon progressed, William found himself drawn to the old oak tree, where a memorial garden had been planted near the arena. At its center stood a simple stone bench engraved with names, children who had been part of the program but had succumbed to their illnesses. Their time at Westfield Haven, a bright chapter in lives too quickly concluded. No one at the center used the word "died." Instead, they spoke of children who had graduated from the program, their spirits remaining present in the flowers that bloomed year after year. William sat on the bench, running his fingers over the most recently added name, Charlotte Wilson, a 7-year-old with an aggressive form of leukemia who had found rare moments of freedom on horseback during her final months. Her parents still visited regularly, volunteering with other children, finding healing in continuing Charlotte's legacy. "I thought I might find you here." William looked up to find his son approaching, moving more slowly than usual, but with determination. Ethan sat beside him on the bench, both of them silent for a moment as they watched the activity continuing in the arena. "Tough day?" William asked quietly, noting the slight tremor in Ethan's hands. "Medium," Ethan replied honestly, using their private scale for his symptoms. "I'll need to rest this evening, but I wanted to finish with all my students first." William nodded, resisting the urge to insist his son rest immediately. Their relationship had healed through his learning to respect Ethan's autonomy, to trust him, to know his own limits. "Anything I can do?" "I'm okay," Ethan assured him. "But I wanted to talk to you about something important." William turned to face his son fully, recognizing the serious tone. "What is it?" "I got a letter from Mom yesterday," Ethan said carefully. William stiffened slightly. Catherine had left when Ethan was 6, unable to bear William's relentless drive and emotional unavailability. Their divorce had been civilized but final, with Catherine eventually remarrying and moving to California. She maintained sporadic contact with Ethan, but had been largely absent from his life, a fact William had once used to reinforce his belief that she was weak, a quitter. "She's been following the news about Westfield Haven online," Ethan continued. "Someone sent her that article from the Chronicle." He paused, then added, "She's asking if she could visit, see what we've built here." A complex mixture of emotions washed through William. Old resentment, lingering guilt, and something newer and less familiar, forgiveness. Not just for Catherine, but for himself. "How would you feel about that?" he asked, genuinely wanting to know his son's thoughts. "I'd like to see her," Ethan admitted, "and I'd like her to see who I've become, who we've both become." William nodded slowly. "Then write her back. Tell her she's welcome here." Ethan studied his father's face, searching for the rigid businessman who had once forbidden mention of Catherine in their home. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," William replied, surprising himself with how true it felt. "This place is about healing, isn't it? Maybe that should include all kinds of healing." Ethan's smile was worth any discomfort the reunion might bring. After a moment, the boy leaned slightly against his father's shoulder, a casual physical contact that would have been unthinkable in their old life. "You know," Ethan said after a comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about college." William tensed involuntarily, then consciously relaxed. His old self would have immediately pushed for prestigious universities, business degrees, a path that mirrored his own. Now, he simply asked, "What are you thinking?" "Equine-assisted therapy has specialized certification programs," Ethan explained. "And there's a college in Kentucky with a dual degree in psychology and equine science. I could live on campus, but come home for weekends and holidays." He hesitated, then added, "If my health allows it." Pride swelled in William's chest. Not the possessive pride of seeing his son follow in his footsteps, but the deeper pride of watching Ethan forge his own path. "I think that sounds perfect," he said simply. "And if there are days when your health makes things difficult, we'll figure it out, together." The evening sun cast long golden shadows across Westfield Haven as they sat together, father and son, watching as the day's activities wound down. Volunteers led horses back to their stalls. Children called out goodbyes to their equine partners. Parents exchanged contact information and supportive hugs. At the end of the paddock, Marcus was attempting to lead Shadow back to his stall, but the massive horse had stopped, his attention fixed on Ethan sitting beneath the memorial tree. With a soft nicker that carried across the yard, Shadow pulled gently away from Marcus and walked deliberately toward Ethan, his powerful body moving with unexpected grace for an animal his size. William watched as his son stood to meet the horse, their connection visible even from a distance. Shadow lowered his great head, and Ethan pressed his forehead against the white star between the horse's eyes, a gesture of communion that seemed to transcend the barriers between species. In that moment, William Montgomery finally understood what Marcus had tried to tell him years ago. There were indeed different kinds of strength, the strength to build empires and the strength to be vulnerable, the strength to demand excellence and the strength to offer compassion, the strength to stand alone and the strength to recognize when another is falling. As the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, casting the last golden light across Westfield Haven, William watched his son and the horse who had changed both their lives. Around them, the community they had built continued its gentle work of healing, one ride at a time, one connection at a time, one moment of joy reclaimed from pain. This, William realized, was his true legacy, not the fortune he had amassed, or the buildings that bore his name, But this place of transformation, this harbor for wounded hearts, this testament to the truth that had taken him a lifetime to learn, that real strength isn't found in never falling, but in rising again with greater wisdom, not in standing alone, but in learning to lean on others, not in conquest, but in connection. As Shadow and Ethan walked back toward him, silhouetted against the sunset, William Montgomery knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found the success that mattered most, not measured in dollars or accolades, but in the light returning to his son's eyes and in the lives touched by their shared journey from darkness into hope. "Ready to head in?" Ethan asked as they reached. "Him," Shadow's warm breath ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Yes," William said, rising from the memorial bench. "Let's go home." Together, the three of them walked toward the mansion that had once been a showplace and was now truly a home, father, son, and the silent guardian who had taught them both the meaning of true strength. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Shadow's journey has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. If you've been moved by this story of transformation, connection, and discovering what true strength really means, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that remind us of the healing power of compassion. Leave a like if Shadow's silent guardianship resonated with you, and share in the comments what moment in this story moved you most deeply. Remember, sometimes our greatest teachers come to us not with words, but with a gentle spirit and unwavering presence. Join us next week for another story that celebrates the resilience of the human spirit and the bonds that help us heal.